Alistair Smith. Alistair Smythe, known as the Ultimate Spider Slayer, first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 19 in November 1985, created by Louise Simonson and Mary Wilshire. Introduced as the son of Spencer Smythe, the original Spider Slayer inventor, Alistair inherited both his father's genius and his obsession with destroying Spider-Man. After escaping confinement in an asylum, he forced fellow inmates to help him upgrade his father's robotic hunters, proving that for him, revenge was not only inherited but amplified. A fateful battle left him paralyzed, but instead of accepting defeat, he rebuilt himself. Encased in a bioorganic carapace, Smythe regained mobility and gained enhanced strength, agility, wall-crawling ability, and an arsenal of weapons, from shoulder-mounted lasers to bladed forearms. This transformation earned him the title of Ultimate Spider Slayer. His vendetta escalated through multiple campaigns, orchestrating swarms of mini-slayers, constructing armies of machines, and even causing the death of Marla Jameson, J. Jonah's wife. He could be dangerous, but every story returned to the same theme: revenge on Spider-Man and those he blamed for his father's downfall. Eventually, his cycle ended during the Superior Spider-Man storyline, where Otto Octavius, controlling Spider-Man's body, defeated and killed him. Even afterward, his body was briefly exploited for cloning experiments, yet his legacy remained defined by endless repetition. Was weaponized technology alone ever enough to make him memorable? The Third Green Goblin. The story of Dr. Bart Hamilton shows what happens when professional boundaries collapse under the weight of obsession. First introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man number 167 as Harry Osborn's psychiatrist, Hamilton began by treating Harry during one of his most fragile periods. But therapy sessions soon crossed into forbidden ground. Harry revealed the secrets of the Goblin identity, hidden layers, advanced weaponry, and even Spider-Man's vulnerabilities. For Hamilton, this wasn't cautionary information, it was an invitation. By The Amazing Spider-Man number 176, he had taken the next step, exposing himself to the Goblin formula and stepping into the role of the Third Green Goblin. Like his predecessors, he flew the glider and hurled pumpkin bombs, but unlike Norman and Harry, Hamilton possessed no personal history with Spider-Man, no deep-rooted trauma, and no tangled family legacy fueling his actions. His drive was ambition, without context, an attempt to seize control of New York's underworld by wearing another man's mask. That lack of emotional weight made him feel hollow compared to the Osborns, whose madness and legacy gave the Goblin mantle its staying power. Hamilton's career ended suddenly in a three-way clash with Spider-Man and Harry, where a pen bomb explosion consumed him in an incinerator plant. Though briefly cloned years later, he never returned to prominence. Hamilton remains a forgotten footnote in Goblin history, a reminder that legacy mantles need narrative roots. Silvermane. Silvio Manfredi, better known as Silvermane, first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 73 as one of the Maggia's most ruthless crime bosses. Unlike other villains chasing flashy gimmicks, Silvermane's threat came from his balance of organized crime power and an unrelenting fear of mortality. A rival to the Kingpin, he sought not just dominance in the underworld, but also a way to escape the inevitability of aging. His obsession drove him to the Tablet of Time, a mystical artifact promising renewed youth. At first, the serum seemed to work, but then his body de-aged uncontrollably until he became an infant. Though his physiology later stabilized for a short time, letting him re-emerge as a stronger, middle-aged man, the reprieve was temporary. Age caught up again, and each solution became more desperate. Eventually, surgeons transplanted his head and vital organs into a robotic shell, granting him strength and durability, but making him less human with every upgrade. The cycle ended in humiliation. Reduced to a disembodied head mounted on a small-wheeled platform, Silvermane no longer resembled the feared crime lord he once was. His corrupt empire collapsed, and his life ended crushed in a gang war garbage compactor. From crime boss to discarded machine, his story is a cautionary tale. Every attempt to prolong his rule only stripped away his dignity. Stegron. Stegron was a scientist hired by S.H.I.E.L.D. to work alongside Dr. Kirk Connors studying reptilian DNA. Fascinated by Connor's transformation into the lizard, Stegron decided to push the experiment further by using himself as the subject. The result was his grotesque rebirth as the Dinosaur Man. His skin hardened into scales, his strength amplified, and he gained the uncanny ability to command dinosaurs and influence the reptilian part of the human brain. Stegron often turned New York into his personal hunting ground, dragging prehistoric chaos into the modern world. When not terrorizing the city, he resurfaced in the Savage Land, rallying armies of dinosaurs behind his cause. His ambitions reached as far as devolving humanity into creatures like himself, but his appearances became strikingly predictable. He would mutate, make his move, face defeat, and inevitably re-emerge to repeat the cycle. Crucially, his weaknesses undermined his threat. Cold weather forced him into hibernation, and drowning seemed to end him more than once. Critics often dismissed him as too similar to the Lizard, a less compelling copy of a villain Spider-Man already had. Even alliances like his best-known team-up with Sauron failed to elevate him beyond this reputation. Stunner. Angelina Broncow, better known as Stunner, first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 397. Before her transformation, she lived a quiet, unremarkable life as secretary to Carolyn Traynor, the second Dr. Octopus. Overweight, isolated, and filled with insecurity, Angelina's personal unhappiness was compounded by her fixation on Otto Octavius. When she became part of a virtual reality experiment, that longing turned into something far more dangerous. Inside the VR construct, Angelina created her ideal self, a towering, beautiful, unstoppable avatar that embodied everything she wished she could be. This fantasy form became Stunner. With it came enormous strength, durability, and the ability to challenge even Spider-Man in raw physical combat. To the outside world, she seemed like a powerhouse who could lift tons and shrug off punishing blows. But Stunner's formidable presence came with a built-in flaw. Her existence and powers were entirely bound to the virtual construct Octavius created. Even her most independent actions, like seeking revenge on Kane during the Clone Saga, were consequences of her devotion to him. When Dr. Octopus eventually returned, Angelina's story lost its drive. Grizzly, Maxwell Max Markham, better known as the Grizzly, made his debut in The Amazing Spider-Man number 139. Once a professional wrestler, his career collapsed after J. Jonah Jameson's articles led to his license being revoked. Angry and looking for a new spotlight, Markham turned to crime. The Jackal equipped him with a massive bear-themed exosuit, turning him into the Grizzly. Later, the Tinkerer upgraded it further, giving him more strength and durability than ever. On paper, the suit made him formidable. Its armored plating, crushing claws, and raw force put him on the level of Spider-Man's toughest physical opponents. Yet in practice, every battle with Spider-Man ended in the same way. Webbed up, beaten, and humiliated. His bear motif, taken so literally, only made him appear more ridiculous. Instead of being feared, he became an ongoing punchline in the rogues gallery. Still, Grizzly's constant failures gave him unusual longevity. He even joined the Legion of Losers, a group of villains united not by glory, but by defeat. This self-awareness shifted how readers saw him, not a major threat, but oddly endearing. Appearances in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon and a brief cameo in Across the Spider-Verse proved that failure didn't erase him, it cemented him. Grizzly embodies the paradox of the lovable loser, remembered because of incompetence rather than menace. The Grim Reaper. Eric Williams, better known as the Grim Reaper, made his first appearance in The Avengers number 52, and remains primarily associated with the Avengers rather than Spider-Man. Wielding a cybernetic scythe that could drain life energy, project electrical blasts, and eventually channel necromantic forces, he had the makings of a terrifying supervillain. Yet when it came to Spider-Man's corner of the Marvel Universe, his presence was faint and left little lasting impact. Eric's motivations came from resentment toward his younger brother, Simon Williams, Wonder Man, whose heroic path made Eric's turn to villainy feel like a bitter inversion. His weapon eventually expanded beyond its original functions to encompass necromancy, illusion casting, and summoning demons, pushing him deeper into the supernatural. This evolution gave him credibility in Avengers storylines and secured him ties to larger forces like Hydra and villain teams such as the Lethal Legion, where he worked as a mercenary or assassin. The problem was that in Spider-Man's world, he never established a personal connection or vendetta. His sporadic appearances were almost always within teams, which diluted his individuality and made him feel like just another crossover obstacle. Even his recent resurrection arcs, where he briefly gained prominence in mutant storylines, underscored that his relevance lies outside Spider-Man's mythology. The female Dr. Octopus. Carolyn Traynor, better known as the female Dr. Octopus, first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 406 during the mid-1990s Clone Saga. The daughter of geneticist Seward Traynor and once a promising student of Otto Octavius, Carolyn saw her mentor's apparent death as an unbearable loss. Instead of pursuing her own research, she chose to carry his identity forward by becoming him. Traynor adopted the Dr. Octopus mantle and armed herself with mechanical tentacles built on Otto's original design. Unlike his harness, hers carried major upgrades, including mounted lasers and a protective force field, making her a dangerous opponent. She also allied with a digitized copy of Octavius's mind known as the Master Programmer, which served as both guidance and proof of how deeply she bound her life to his memory. To Carolyn, she wasn't replacing Otto, she was preserving him. This dedication also revealed her greatest flaw. Carolyn's strength as a successor never translated into originality. Her arc only existed in the void left behind by Otto's absence. Once he inevitably returned, her narrative purpose vanished. Even adopting the alias Lady Octopus couldn't secure her place. She became another example of a clone saga creation unable to stand outside a legacy. The Rose. Richard Fisk's story carried the weight of an impossible inheritance. Discovering that his father, Wilson Fisk, lived a double life as the kingpin of crime, Richard chose not to abandon that world, but to fight it on his own terms. His first attempt came as the Schemer, a bold but clumsy identity meant to disrupt his father's empire. Later, in The Amazing Spider-Man number 253, he refined his strategy by becoming the Rose, a mask of calm authority that contrasted with his father's brute strength. As the Rose, Richard operated like a shadowy tactician. Instead of ruling with intimidation, he brokered alliances, manipulated rival gangs, and commanded hired killers with precision. He even shifted again into the identity of Blood Rose, a vigilante-style enforcer. Unlike his father's dominance, Richard's approach depended on strategy and image. This presented a rare angle in the Marvel underworld, a son defined not by loyalty, but by methodical rebellion. Yet tragedy closed his story. Richard's war blurred the line between rebellion and replication until Vanessa Fisk herself intervened. His own mother ended his life, cutting short the son versus father conflict before it could reshape Spider-Man's criminal landscape. Other figures later wore the Rose mask, diluting what uniqueness his version briefly carried. Typeface. Typeface was Gordon Thomas, a former graphic designer whose life unraveled after losing both his job and his sense of direction. First appearing in the early 2000s, he rebranded himself with a strange gimmick, using a grease pencil to scrawl giant block letters across his face and wielding oversized letters as weapons. He hurled them like blunt projectiles, formed barriers out of lettering, and stormed the Daily Bugle offices in what became his most infamous exploit. In that clash, he used giant cutout ads, headlines, and signage as makeshift tools of destruction, an absurd but oddly memorable spectacle. For all the apparent ingenuity, his greatest flaw was his obsession with form itself. Typeface was compulsive about perfect spelling and clean letter shapes, to the point where Spider-Man could distract him by deliberately writing graffiti with errors. That fixation turned battles into embarrassments and made his gimmick unsustainable as a lasting threat. His trajectory, however, wasn't limited to a single crime spree. Typeface briefly shifted into reluctant heroism, opposed the Superhuman Registration Act during Civil War, and was even believed dead more than once, only to resurface again. Still, his erratic roles never overcame the central problem, a concept built on visual novelty and little else. Slide. Meet Jalom Beecher, a chemical engineer whose career collapsed after his employer stole the breakthrough formula he had created. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man number 272, Beecher had designed a frictionless chemical coating that could have revolutionized the non-stick industry. Instead, betrayal and unemployment left him bitter enough to turn that invention into a weapon. Crafting a specially coated suit, he reinvented himself as Slide, the slippery criminal who believed speed and evasion would make him untouchable. His suit allowed him to glide across surfaces with zero resistance, sliding effortlessly over streets, walls, and even Spider-Man's webs, which couldn't adhere to him. This made him a nightmare for bank security and law enforcement, where his escape tricks gave him a temporary advantage. Against ordinary police, Slide looked like he might have struck on something clever, but in practice, his design failed against Spider-Man. The suit gave him agility without giving him real speed, and the lack of friction made controlling momentum impossible. Every confrontation ended with him spinning out or being outmaneuvered, as Spider-Man's precision and reflexes erased the gimmick entirely. Cool idea, weak execution. So why didn't he evolve? Because Slide never moved past low-stakes robberies or shallow motivations, sealing him in obscurity. Gaunt. Mendel Stromm, better known as the Robot Master, first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 37 as Norman Osborn's scientific partner and co-creator of the Goblin formula. Betrayed and framed by Osborn for embezzlement, Stromm served a decade in prison, emerging with nothing but hatred for his former ally. His early stint as the Robot Master ended abruptly in an explosion, seemingly closing the book on his story. But in the 1990s Clone Saga, Stromm returned in a more disturbing form. Revived in secret by Osborn, Stromm's failing body was sustained with cybernetics and machinery, transforming him into the skeletal figure known as Gaunt. His strength came not from flesh, but from an armored harness, cables, and integrated weaponry that allowed him to manipulate technology directly. No longer fully human, Gaunt lived as a hybrid of man and machine, consumed by the vengeance that had defined him since his betrayal. The most haunting moment of his arc came when, losing control over his technological body, Stromm begged Spider-Man to kill him. His genius had turned into a prison, and his need for revenge left him with nothing to live for. Yet his tragic story was swallowed by the Clone Saga's overcrowded cast of villains. Surrounded by recycled identities and short-lived experiments, Gaunt became another casualty of an era that produced too many shadows of greater foes. Blackie Drago. Raniero Blackie Drago's rise came not from invention or vision, but from betrayal. Introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man number 48, 1967, by Stan Lee and John Romita Sr., Drago was a prison cellmate of Adrian Toomes, the original Vulture. While sharing a cell in Alcatraz, Drago saw Toomes growing frail and vulnerable. Instead of respecting the man who once terrorized New York, he poisoned Toomes' food and manipulated him into revealing the location of his Vulture harness. With the stolen wings in his possession, Drago claimed the mantle for himself. For a moment, it looked as if the younger Vulture might succeed. The wings gave him the same aerial agility and strength as Toomes, and Drago launched into flashy crimes that drew attention. He even crossed paths not only with Spider-Man, but also with Kraven the Hunter. Yet beneath the theatrics, his foundation was weak. Drago lacked Toomes' bitterness, drive, and personal grudge against Spider-Man, the very elements that made the original Vulture menacing. When Toomes escaped and took back his identity, Drago's career collapsed instantly. His role was never more than a placeholder, a temporary substitute with no real story grounding to sustain him. Costume does not equal legacy, story does. Gibbon. Martin Blank's life was shaped by a mutation he never asked for. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man number 110, he was born with simian features that gave him enhanced agility, long arms, and the stance of a gibbon. Physically gifted but marked as different, he longed to be accepted as a hero. Reaching out to Spider-Man was his pivotal moment, but instead of welcome, he faced ridicule. When Spider-Man laughed at his appearance, Blank's hope collapsed, and the humiliation drove him to take on the mocking name of Gibbon. His villainy was never born of greed or ambition. He joined the Spider-Man Revenge Squad not to conquer, but to prove that he could matter. His arc was defined by rejection and a desperate search for belonging. Whether through ill-fated partnerships like his brief team-up with Grizzly or doomed attempts at friendship, he often looked less like a threat and more like a man trapped by loneliness. Years later, his story reached its final note. Mortally wounded, he died cradled in Spider-Man's arms. In that moment, he felt peace at last, comforted that he was no longer being mocked. Unlike other gimmick-driven villains, Gibbon's legacy is remembered precisely for that emotional closure. The Hypno Hustler. Antoine Delson, better known as the Hypno Hustler, made his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man number 24 in 1978. His entire image was tied to the disco craze of the era, from a flamboyant costume with oversized accessories to platform boots that contained retractable blades and even knockout gas. On stage, he fronted a backup group called the Mercy Killers, and his high-tech headset protected him from the hypnotic sound waves emitted by his guitar. It was all spectacle, music, fashion, and mind control blended into one campy villain persona. His crimes followed the same formula: hypnotize nightclub audiences with amplified sound frequencies, rob them while entrancing the crowd, and let the band help carry the loot. For Spider-Man, defeating him was less a test of strength than a simple trick. By removing the Hustler's protective headphones, Spidey caused him to succumb to his own hypnosis, ending the performance in humiliating fashion. This reliance on a gimmick that could be unraveled by a single move meant there was little room for long-term menace. His disco-themed identity also dated him instantly, leaving him tethered to a cultural fad that aged poorly. Still, obscurity sometimes breeds reinvention. While the Hypno Hustler has long been considered a punchline, his status as a time-locked oddity makes him a strange but enduring cultural artifact. So, which of these sidelined villains do you feel deserves another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to hit like and subscribe for more Explainerverse videos just like this one.